And it was one of those hairs on the back of the neck moment when I realized they're not listening.
Everyone thought they knew why Challenger fell from the sky. But now the truth has finally been solved. And it's not just surprising, it's disturbing. Decisions were made, warnings were ignored, and lives were lost. What happened is something no one wanted to admit. Join us as we unveil what no one wanted to admit about the Challenger. What happened after Challenger broke apart? The Challenger space shuttle accident is considered one of the saddest events in space exploration history. The entire world witnessed the shuttle exploding just 73 seconds after taking off, which was a horrifying sight. However, what a lot of people don't know is that the tragedy did not end there. Despite the shuttle breaking apart, the journey and the people on board did not come to an immediate halt. There were still some moments before the shuttle fell from the sky. During those moments, something distressing, quiet, and unforgettable occurred. When the Challenger disintegrated in the sky, it did not explode and kill everyone right away. The parts of the shuttle, such as the crew cabin, kept going upwards because of the power from the launch. This momentum took them to around 65,000 feet before gravity brought everything back down towards the ocean. The crew cabin was one of the biggest and most complete sections that remained intact after the shuttle broke apart. It contained the astronauts who were still securely strapped in and on their journey. It took about 2 minutes and 45 seconds from the breakup to when the cabin landed in the water. NASA doesn't discuss this time much, but it is important and significant. During the return journey to Earth, many believe the crew was still alive. However, it is unclear whether they were conscious or unconscious. It is possible that the cabin lost pressure when the shuttle broke apart, causing the air to become thin. Breathing in such conditions would have been extremely difficult without assistance. Some emergency air bottles on board were activated, although they were not intended for this situation but rather for emergencies on the ground like smoke inside the shuttle. The activation of these bottles indicates that some crew members may have been alert enough to use them. According to the last reports from NASA, it is suggested that the crew may have lost consciousness during the fall, but it is not confirmed. It is uncertain whether they regained consciousness before the cabin crashed into the ocean. As the cabin descended into denser air, it is possible that breathing became easier. Unfortunately, we can never know what the crew experienced or thought during those last moments. The cabin crashed into the ocean at a speed of over 200 miles per hour. The collision was extremely destructive. The intensity of the crash was calculated to be around 200 Gs. This level of force is beyond what a human body can endure. The cabin was instantly flattened. Everything inside it was demolished. If the crew was still awake during the crash, it would have ended quickly. If they were unconscious, they would not have felt a thing. These 3 minutes are often overlooked. NASA tributes and speeches usually only talk about the 73 seconds of the shuttle's flight before it broke apart. Not much is said about what happened after the shuttle broke apart, but those 3 minutes are important. During those moments, the astronauts may have still been alive, holding on and sticking together. This part of the story is full of sadness, quietness, and unanswered questions that will remain. The disaster was found to be caused by the booster rockets on the shuttle. These rockets are attached to the side and help propel the shuttle into space. Each booster is made up of 4 pieces that are assembled together. On the Challenger launch, there was a leak in one of the joints where hot gases escaped. This leak caused damage to the structure and ultimately led to the shuttle's destruction. Many people ask why the boosters were constructed in 4 sections instead of 1. The reason is quite simple. It's more practical. It would be more difficult to safely fill a single, lengthy solid booster with fuel. It would also be more challenging to transport and stack at the launch site. Breaking the boosters into segments made the process easier to manage. This design had proven successful in other rockets for many years, especially in the military space program. Some critics mention the company that made the boosters was from Utah, the state of a powerful senator. However, NASA chose the company for reasons unrelated to politics. The company had a strong reputation and fulfilled the technical requirements of the mission. Although the segment design was considered sensitive, it was not fatally flawed when used in proper conditions. The issue was not solely with the design, but also with the shuttle launch on a very cold morning. The cold temperatures affected the rubber seals between the booster segments, causing them to malfunction. Engineers had been making small changes to those seals for a long time. They were aware that the seals were not flawless, but the boosters had been flying successfully before the Challenger disaster. In spaceflight, there has always been a trade-off between the chances of something going wrong and the benefits. However, on that particular day, the risk led to a tragic outcome. Whenever people think of the Challenger disaster, they often remember the happy crew as the shuttle launched, the unexpected smoke trail in the sky, and the lives that were lost too soon. However, it is difficult to acknowledge that the lives of the crew did not immediately end when the shuttle broke apart. For almost 3 minutes, they were still soaring in the sky, descending and trying to hold on. In the quiet moment between the sky and the sea, a very human event occurred, one that may always remain mysterious, but one that will always be remembered. Now let's look into the actual truth that is not accurate: the Challenger disaster. On a chilly January morning, many individuals tuned into their TVs to watch the Space Shuttle Challenger take off. It was supposed to be a day of pride and excitement. Teachers brought TVs into their classrooms while families gathered at home to watch. Everyone was eager to see something extraordinary. The Challenger was carrying 7 astronauts, including a school teacher who had been selected to travel to space. 73 seconds after the spaceship took off, a lot happened. There was a sudden burst of light, smoke, and then a scary explosion in the sky. It became quiet just as fast. The happiness of the launch turned into deep sadness. The crew and the spaceship had disappeared. The scenes of the accident were shown repeatedly on TV. Many were stunned by the news. Some people cried while others just sat still, struggling to come to terms with what they had witnessed. Many individuals believed they understood what occurred after that point. Rumors and tales started circulating over time. People exchanged and spread information they had heard, but much of it turned out to be inaccurate. Some preferred to believe a more straightforward explanation of the disaster, but the reality was more complex. It is important to know the truth. One popular misconception is that the space shuttle exploded immediately and the astronauts were executed instantly. However, experts in space and engineering understand that this is not accurate. The explosion of the shuttle did not occur as people believe. The actual truth is difficult to come to terms with, but it is crucial to acknowledge. The Challenger disaster was not a fiery explosion, but rather a result of structural failure. A faulty joint on one of the solid rocket boosters led to the shuttle coming apart. This allowed hot gas to escape, causing the fuel tank to collapse. As a result, the rest of the shuttle could not remain intact. After the shuttle broke apart, the part of the shuttle where the astronauts were sitting, called the crew cabin, was still whole. It kept going up before starting to descend back to Earth. Specialists think the astronauts were still alive during this descent. The crew cabin crashed into the ocean quickly, and sadly, this is when their lives ended. It's a sad fact, but it's not exactly what people might think happened. Some people believe that NASA launched the mission quickly because politicians were pushing them. This is not entirely accurate. Many individuals were enthusiastic about the mission and believed it would bring more attention and support to the space program. However, the notion that influential politicians compelled NASA to launch despite knowing it was unsafe does not capture the whole truth. The choice to launch the shuttle wasn't made easily. Numerous meetings took place where engineers, managers, and leaders talked about various aspects like weather conditions and shuttle components. However, one issue stood out: the O-rings. These rubber seals and the rocket booster joints were not fully understood. On the cold morning of the launch, the O-rings malfunctioned due to the freezing temperatures, causing them to become stiff and unable to properly seal the joints. Some individuals think that NASA chose a less strong sealant for environmental concerns, but this is not true. The main problem was not the material used, but how it reacted in cold temperatures. The engineers had noticed issues with the O-rings in the past, but they were unaware that low temperatures could lead to complete failure. Looking back now, it's simple to blame others. It's simple to say someone should have halted the launch. However, at that moment, the complete risk was not obvious. There were indications, but they were not completely comprehended or taken seriously. This is not a tale of people disregarding danger intentionally. It's a story of people doing their best, but not recognizing the complete truth until it was too late. In the years after the accident, NASA made a lot of changes. They halted shuttle flights temporarily to thoroughly review the program and identify what caused the disaster. The Rogers Commission was established to investigate the incident, and its findings influenced the future of space exploration. Some employees were let go, and new safety regulations were put in place, leading to a greater emphasis on safety. Over time, people's memories of the truth started to become less clear. The true events were replaced with simpler, more easily remembered versions. While people recalled the explosion, the sadness, and what they saw on TV, They often forgot the precise reasons for the events. This is why it is crucial to recount the story accurately. The 7 courageous members of the Challenger crew should be honored and remembered for their dedication and sacrifice. They spent years in training and believed in a cause greater than themselves. Trusting in the system, they ultimately gave their lives for it. Their legacy should not be distorted into myths, but instead preserved with sincere and respectful remembrance. It's not only the responsibility of scientists or historians to be honest. Everyone, including teachers, students, and families, should strive to comprehend the actual events. Remembering the true narrative aids in our education, personal development, and pays tribute to those who perished in a meaningful manner. The Challenger disaster wasn't just a failure, but also a tragic and transformative event. Despite the tragedy, it sparked improvements in space travel safety for the future. It's important to remember the Challenger for its real impact rather than myths. Claims that the disaster was just a necessary sacrifice for exploring new territory were excuses made by people in charge who didn't manage the engineering well. The disaster could have been prevented. Could this be the reason there was no loud shock or booming sound heard on the ground? The truth behind the broadcast. In January 1986, a significant event occurred in the sky that had a lasting impact on history. The Challenger space shuttle, carrying aspirations and ambitions, launched into the sky for a mission filled with pride and anticipation. However, the thrill soon turned into a feeling of stillness, disbelief, and sorrow. Many individuals recall witnessing the tragedy unfold on their TV screens, believing they were seeing it happen in real time. Nevertheless, the reality is more intricate and nuanced than what was perceived. At that time, cable news was still a recent development. It was just starting to expand, and not many households had round-the-clock access to news like we do now. Only CNN was airing the shuttle launch live, while other big networks had stopped broadcasting it. They aired the initial moments of the launch, then switched to other topics or shows. Therefore, when the disaster occurred, they were not live on television. They had to quickly come back on air, playing recorded clips and replaying the moment repeatedly. One group of people who were closely following the events as they happened were students and teachers. This is because Krista McAuliffe, a teacher herself, was going to be the first regular educator to travel to space. Schools all over the United States were thrilled about this. NASA had set up special satellite broadcasts so that classrooms could watch every detail of the mission. However, only a few schools had access to this satellite coverage. Most people at home did not have satellite dishes to tune into the broadcast unless they had the necessary equipment. Therefore, when the shuttle exploded, many people recalled the moment as being live, but it was a replay that was shown shortly after the tragedy. Many people think the shuttle exploded like a bomb, but that's not what occurred. Explosions in movies are typically loud, fiery, and powerful, causing a big bang and shaking the Earth. However, the Challenger disaster was different. There was no loud shock or booming sound heard on the ground. Witnesses instead heard the sudden stop of the shuttle's engines, going from roaring to complete silence in an instant. High above the Earth, something terrifying happened in a silent yet impactful manner. About 46,000 feet in the air, the external fuel tank of the shuttle fell apart, releasing liquid oxygen and hydrogen. These substances combined and created a massive fireball in the sky, which appeared like an explosion. However, it wasn't a typical explosion that destroys everything instantly. Instead, it was caused by the tank failing and the gases burning as they mixed in the atmosphere. The solid rocket boosters, which were attached to the sides of the tank, continued to function after the explosion. They were unaffected by the accident and continued to fly upwards through the fiery cloud. The boosters remained unharmed and were eventually turned off manually. Challenger did not disappear all at once in a big explosion. Instead, it was torn apart. When the tank failed and a fireball formed, the shuttle was pushed away from the other parts of the rocket. It started spinning and turning sideways in the fast-moving wind. This wind, moving faster than the speed of sound, caused the spacecraft to break apart. It was unable to withstand the power of the winds. The shuttle shattered into numerous pieces, with some parts landing in the sky and sea. Within the cloud, the fuel tanks that were separated from the shuttle started to explode. The tanks fell away and burst one by one. Despite this, the Challenger had already disappeared without a single massive explosion. Instead, it was destroyed by a combination of mechanical issues and extreme external forces. Some documentaries later used sound effects to make the footage more dramatic by adding a loud explosion sound. However, the actual sound heard that day was not like that. The event was quieter, making it more tragic due to its sudden and unexpected nature. There was no warning or countdown to the disaster, just a sudden silence, followed by a growing fireball and the slow realization that something had gone terribly wrong. The emotional impact of this story was heightened by how people witnessed it. Teachers, students, families, and friends were all shocked and confused by what they saw. News reporters were at a loss for words, and broadcasters repeatedly showed the same scenes in an attempt to understand. The most heartbreaking part was knowing that 7 brave astronauts who believed in something greater than themselves had lost their lives. The accident of the Challenger spacecraft is famous not only for the sad event itself, but also for how it was broadcasted to the public. It was a time that combined raw feelings with captured footage. This time served as a reminder of the dangers involved in exploring unknown territories. Initially a joyful occasion, it ultimately concluded in grief. The story of Challenger still serves as a reminder for us to dig deeper and truly understand what happened instead of just focusing on what we see in the news or pictures. It shows us that the truth may not always be loud, but it still holds a lot of significance. What was the real problem of the Challenger disaster? Let's find out. The real cause behind Challenger's tragedy. Many theories exist about why the Challenger space shuttle disintegrated. Some of these theories are sensational and have been accepted without the true facts being known. One common tale involves a sealant being swapped out due to high asbestos content. The story suggests that the accident occurred because NASA had to use a less effective sealant. While this explanation may seem plausible, it is false. The reality of the situation is quite different and far more critical. The story about asbestos and NASA has become a popular myth online. According to this myth, NASA had to stop using a pressure sealant that contained asbestos because regulators told them to switch to a weaker material, which ended up causing a disaster. However, this story is not true. The switch to a new sealant occurred before the Challenger disaster, and it had nothing to do with environmental regulations or safety guidelines. The original sealant, which contained asbestos, had issues with sealing correctly. Engineers decided to try a different sealant also containing asbestos in order to find a more effective option, not due to legal requirements. However, when engineers began using a new method to test the seals, they observed an increase in leaks, which was unexpected. The number of seal breaches appeared to be rising, leading some to suspect the new putty as the cause. However, it was later discovered that the issue was not the putty itself, but the testing procedure being used, which was exacerbating the problem. During these tests, air bubbles were forming in the sealant, creating weak points. Physicist Richard Feynman, who played a role in investigating the Challenger disaster, suggested that the leak checks during testing could have been responsible for these bubbles. While the tests served a purpose, they also brought about new challenges. However, the bubbles and putty issue were not responsible for the shuttle's destruction. The main problem was with the O-ring, a rubber component that was supposed to keep hot gases inside the rocket booster. Unfortunately, the O-ring failed to effectively seal due to the cold weather on the launch day, causing it to become stiff and not seal properly. As a result, hot gases escaped and caused damage to surrounding parts, ultimately leading to the shuttle breaking apart only 73 seconds after liftoff. The O-ring was not changed or improved. It was well known that it did not work well in cold temperatures. Despite this, there were many delays, and those in charge felt pressured to proceed with the launch. This pressure did not come from political leaders, as some rumors suggest. There was no directive from the White House or any politician to push for the launch. The idea that President Reagan wanted the launch to happen so he could talk about it in his State of the Union address is unsubstantiated. Feynman investigated this claim personally, but could not find any concrete evidence to back it up. If the launch had happened at the expected time, the astronauts would have been sleeping while Reagan was speaking. There were no preparations made to include the flight in the president's speech. Therefore, even if someone wanted to make it a big moment in the speech, it would not have been possible. The launch did not have any link to the president's schedule. Instead, the main pressure was coming from the flight schedule. There were numerous missions scheduled, including 2 important space probes by NASA. These probes had particular launch windows that were set in stone. If the shuttle did not launch quickly, the probes would miss their chance to depart Earth. This would result in waiting years for another opportunity. NASA was determined not to postpone everything again, especially after facing embarrassment on TV due to frequent shuttle launch delays. The team was eager to avoid any further delays. Despite concerns from engineers about the cold weather and O-rings, the decision to proceed with the launch was made. This tough choice ultimately ended in tragedy when the shuttle disintegrated in front of a global audience, resulting in the tragic loss of 7 astronauts. Ultimately, the Challenger disaster was not caused by asbestos, weak putty, or politics. Instead, it stemmed from a technical issue that was known but not fully grasped in terms of its danger. It involved decisions being made hastily and warnings being overlooked. The lesson to be learned from the Challenger disaster is not shrouded in mystery or conspiracy. It is evident and heartbreaking. Attention to even small details is crucial for safety. Those involved were doing their best, but errors were made, and those errors had deadly consequences. The rumors may be exciting, but the truth is more significant. It shows us the importance of paying attention to concerns, taking warning signs seriously, and not ignoring our instincts when something feels wrong. The story of the Challenger serves as a reminder of these lessons that should always be remembered. A disaster that did not have to happen. The Challenger disaster was a very sad event in the history of space exploration. What was even more upsetting was that it was preventable. It did not happen by chance or due to pushing boundaries. It happened because of bad choices, warnings that were ignored, and not following safety protocols. Some tried to justify it as a sacrifice for advancement, but the reality is much more heartbreaking. This tragedy could have been prevented entirely. Some individuals behind the scenes noticed the impending danger. A few engineers were highly concerned about the O-rings, which are small rubber seals designed to contain hot gases in the rocket boosters. These seals were not intended to be subjected to extremely cold temperatures. However, on the day of the launch, the weather was exceptionally cold, colder than any other shuttle launch before. The O-rings had displayed weaknesses during previous flights, and now they would be under scrutiny in freezing conditions. Taking this risk was deemed unacceptable. The engineers were aware of the potential issues. They voiced their concerns. However, their opinions were disregarded. Rather than carefully considering the feedback, upper-level managers overseeing the project ultimately decided to proceed. The engineers were either influenced to conform or disregarded altogether. The individuals who were supposed to prioritize safety and defend the team ended up letting the risks go unaddressed. This was a grave error, not only in the realm of science and engineering, but also in terms of making sound decisions. The decision-making process had obvious flaws. The discussions were rushed and the concerns were not given enough attention. The arguments about the cold weather and its potential effects were not presented forcefully enough to change opinions. Those with the power to postpone the launch did not take the time to fully think about the potential consequences. Looking back, it would have been better to delay the launch until conditions were safer. If the shuttle had launched on a warmer day, the outcome could have been different. The issue with the seal would have still been there, but it may not have caused a problem during that particular flight. This would have allowed engineers more time to enhance the design and address the flaw in a cautious and secure manner. Although the seal was already identified for improvement, the process to fix it was progressing slowly, too slow to avert a tragedy. The entire scenario was a result of ignoring lessons that had already been taught. Traveling in space is risky and pushes both technology and individuals to their maximum capabilities. As a result, every small detail holds great significance. Previously, NASA had established a culture based on strict regulations, thorough testing, and prioritizing safety above all else. However, there was a shift in mindset. Due to mounting pressure from the public, media, and politicians, the focus shifted to meeting deadlines. They rushed and took risks, ultimately leading to the loss of 7 lives. The reason for the failure was not because of a lack of knowledge or skill. The issues were already identified and the risks were apparent. The warning signs were present, but those in control decided to ignore them. Instead of preparing for the worst, they chose to stay optimistic. This approach is not effective for safety or building trust. Space travel should not be managed in this manner. The tragedy is compounded by the fact that NASA did not learn any new lessons from the disaster. All the valuable insights that could have been gained were already known from past missions, but they were not heeded. The warnings were overlooked, and the necessary safety measures were disregarded. Many people attempted to justify the event by claiming it was simply a part of exploring the unknown. They argued that mistakes are a natural part of making progress. However, These explanations do not alter the truth. The incident was not about making new discoveries, it was about making poor choices which led to fatal outcomes. There is a deep sorrow associated with a preventable disaster. It's not just the tragedy itself, but the realization that it could have been avoided. The astronauts followed all the necessary steps. They trained, they got ready, they had faith in the process. However, the system failed them. This historical moment serves as a reminder of the importance of heeding expert warnings, following safety regulations, and avoiding haste in critical situations. It highlights the risks of prioritizing appearances or meeting deadlines over doing what is morally right. The Challenger disaster should have resulted in long-term improvements in safety practices, not just short-term fixes. Everyone involved in space exploration has a duty to ensure the safety of astronauts. It's not just about making big decisions, but also making informed ones. No one should be put in danger due to others not listening to their concerns. Ultimately, this was not a tale of courageous discovery that went awry. It was a narrative of bad decisions, opportunities missed, and ignored warnings. And the most unfortunate aspect, the tragedy was not a random occurrence, but rather a preventable event. What do you think about the Challenger myths? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more celebrity gist. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.